Chapter 5 of the Aspern Papers. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. I was seldom at home in the evening, for when I attempted to occupy myself in my apartments the lamplight brought in a swarm of noxious insects, and it was too hot for closed windows. Accordingly I spent the late hours either on the water (the moonlight of Venice is famous) or in the splendid square which serves as a vast forecourt to the strange old basilica of St. Mark. I sat in front of Florian's cafe, eating ices, listening to music, talking with acquaintances. The traveler will remember how the immense cluster of tables and little chairs stretches like a promontory into the smooth lake of the piazza. The whole place of a summer's evening, under the stars and with all the lamps, all the voices and light footsteps on marble (the only sounds of the arcades that enclose it), is like an open-air saloon dedicated to cooling drinks and to a still finer degustation, that of the exquisite impressions received during the day. When I did not prefer to keep mine to myself there was always a stray tourist, disencumbered of his Baedeker, to discuss them with, or some domesticated painter rejoicing in the return of the season of strong effects. The wonderful church with its low domes and bristling embroideries, the mystery of its mosaic and sculpture, looking ghostly in the tempered gloom, and the sea breeze passed between the twin columns of the piazzetta, the lintels of a door no longer guarded, as gently as if a rich curtain were swaying there. I used sometimes on these occasions to think of the Misses Bordereau and of the pity of their being shut up in apartments which in the Venetian July even Venetian vastness did not prevent from being stuffy. Their life seemed miles away from the life of the piazza, and no doubt it was really too late to make the austere Juliana change her habits. But poor Miss Tita would have enjoyed one of Florian's ices, I was sure. Sometimes I even had thoughts of carrying one home to her. Fortunately my patience bore fruit, and I was not obliged to do anything so ridiculous. One evening about the middle of July I came in earlier than usual. I forget what chance had led to this, and instead of going up to my quarters made my way into the garden. The temperature was very high. It was such a night as one would gladly have spent in the open air, and I was in no hurry to go to bed. I had floated home in my gondola, listening to the slow splash of the oar in the narrow dark canals, and now the only thought that solicited me was the vague reflection that it would be pleasant to recline at one's length in the fragrant darkness on a garden bench. The odor of the canal was doubtless at the bottom of that aspiration, and the breath of the garden as I entered it gave consistency to my purpose. It was delicious, just such an air as must have trembled with Romeo's vows when he stood among the flowers and raised his arms to his mistress's balcony. I looked at the windows of the palace to see if by chance the example of Verona not being far off had been followed, but everything was dim as usual and everything was still. Juliana, on summer nights in her youth, might have murmured down from open windows at Jeffrey Aspern, but Miss Tita was not a poet's mistress any more than I was a poet. This, however, did not prevent my gratification from being great as I became aware on reaching the end of the garden that Miss Tita was seated in my little bower. At first I only made out an indistinct figure, not in the least counting on such an overture from one of my hostesses. It even occurred to me that some sentimental maidservant had stolen in to keep a tryst with her sweetheart. I was going to turn away, not to frighten her, when the figure rose to its height and I recognized Miss Bordereau's niece. I must do myself the justice to say that I did not wish to frighten her either, and much as I had longed for some such accident I should have been capable of retreating. It was as if I had laid a trap for her by coming home earlier than usual and adding to that eccentricity by creeping into the garden. As she rose she spoke to me, and then I reflected that perhaps, secure in my almost inveterate absence, it was her nightly practice to take a lonely airing. There was no trap in truth, because I had had no suspicion. At first I took it for granted that the words she uttered expressed discomfiture at my arrival, but as she repeated them (I had not caught them clearly) I had the surprise of hearing her say, "Oh dear, I'm so very glad you've come." She and her aunt had in common the property of unexpected speeches. She came out of the arbor almost as if she were going to throw herself into my arms. I hasten to add that she did nothing of the kind. She did not even shake hands with me. It was a gratification to her to see me, and presently she told me why: because she was nervous when she was out of doors at night alone. The plants and bushes looked so strange in the dark, and there were all sorts of queer sounds. She could not tell what they were, like the noises of animals. She stood close to me, looking about her with an air of greater security, but without any demonstration of interest in me as an individual. Then I guessed that nocturnal prowlings were not in the least her habit, and I was also reminded (I had been struck with the circumstance in talking with her before I took possession) that it was impossible to overestimate her simplicity. "You speak as if you were lost in the backwoods," I said, laughing. "How you manage to keep out of this charming place when you have only 3 steps to take to get into it is more than I have yet been able to discover. You hide away mighty well so long as I am on the premises, I know. But I had a hope that you peeped out a little at other times. You and your poor aunt are worse off than Carmelite nuns in their cells. Should you mind telling me how you exist without air, without exercise, without any sort of human contact? I don't see how you carry on the common business of life." She looked at me as if I were talking some strange tongue, and her answer was so little of an answer that I was considerably irritated. "We go to bed very early, earlier than you could believe." I was on the point of saying that this only deepened the mystery when she gave me some relief by adding, "Before you came we were not so private. But I have never been out at night." "Never in these fragrant alleys, blooming here under your nose?" "Ah," said Miss Tita, "they were never nice till now." There was an unmistakable reference in this and a flattering comparison, so that it seemed to me I had gained a small advantage. As it would help me to follow it up, to establish a sort of grievance, I asked her why, since she thought my garden nice, she had never thanked me in any way for the flowers I had been sending up in such quantities for the previous 3 weeks. I had not been discouraged; there had been, as she would have observed, a daily armful; but I had been brought up in the common forms and a word of recognition now and then would have touched me in the right place. "Why, I didn't know they were for me." "They were for both of you. Why should I make a difference?" Miss Tita reflected as if she might, by thinking of a reason for that, but she failed to produce one. Instead of this she asked abruptly, "Why in the world do you want to know us?" "I ought after all to make a difference," I replied. "That question is your aunt's, it isn't yours. You wouldn't ask it if you hadn't been put up to it." "She didn't tell me to ask you," Miss Tita replied without confusion. She was the oddest mixture of the shrinking and the direct. "Well, she has often wondered about it herself and expressed her wonder to you. She has insisted on it, so that she has put the idea into your head that I am insufferably pushing. Upon my word, I think I have been very discreet. And how completely your aunt must have lost every tradition of sociability to see anything out of the way in the idea that respectable, intelligent people, living as we do under the same roof, should occasionally exchange a remark. What could be more natural? We are of the same country and we have at least some of the same tastes, since, like you, I am intensely fond of Venice." My interlocutress appeared incapable of grasping more than one clause in any proposition, and she declared, quickly, eagerly, as if she were answering my whole speech, "I am not in the least fond of Venice. I should like to go far away." "Has she always kept you back so?" I went on, to show her that I could be as irrelevant as herself. "She told me to come out tonight. She has told me very often," said Miss Tita. "It is I who wouldn't come. I don't like to leave her." "Is she too weak? Is she failing?" I demanded, with more emotion, I think, than I intended to show. I judged this by the way her eyes rested upon me in the darkness. It embarrassed me a little, and to turn the matter off I continued genially, "Do let us sit down together comfortably somewhere, and you will tell me all about her." Miss Tita made no resistance to this. We found a bench less secluded, less confidential, as it were, than the one in the arbor, and we were still sitting there when I heard midnight ring out from those clear bells of Venice which vibrate with a solemnity of their own over the lagoon and hold the air so much more than the chimes of other places. We were together more than an hour, and our interview gave, as it struck me, a great lift to my undertaking. Miss Tita accepted the situation without a protest. She had avoided me for 3 months, yet now she treated me almost as if these 3 months had made me an old friend. If I had chosen I might have inferred from this that though she had avoided me she had given a good deal of consideration to doing so. She paid no attention to the flight of time, never worried at my keeping her so long away from her aunt. She talked freely, answering questions and asking them, and not even taking advantage of certain longish pauses with which they inevitably alternated to say she thought she had better go in. It was almost as if she were waiting for something I might say to her, and intended to give me my opportunity. I was the more struck by this as she told me that her aunt had been less well for a good many days, and in a way that was rather new. She was weaker, at moments it seemed as if she had no strength at all, yet more than ever before she wished to be left alone. That was why she had told her to come out, not even to remain in her own room, which was alongside. She said her niece irritated her, made her nervous. She sat still for hours together, as if she were asleep. She had always done that, musing and dozing, but at such times formerly she gave at intervals some small sign of life, of interest, liking her companion to be near her with her work. Miss Tita confided to me that at present her aunt was so motionless that she sometimes feared she was dead. Moreover, she took hardly any food; one couldn't see what she lived on. The great thing was that she still on most days got up; the serious job was to dress her, to wheel her out of her bedroom. She clung to as many of her old habits as possible, and she had always, little company as they had received for years, made a point of sitting in the parlor. I scarcely knew what to think of all this, of Miss Tita's sudden conversion to sociability, and of the strange circumstance that the more the old lady appeared to decline toward her end, the less she should desire to be looked after. The story did not hang together, and I even asked myself whether it were not a trap laid for me, the result of a design to make me show my hand. I could not have told why my companions, as they could only by courtesy be called, should have this purpose, why they should try to trip up so lucrative a lodger. At any rate I kept on my guard so that Miss Tita should not have occasion again to ask me if I had an arrière-pensée. Poor woman, before we parted for the night my mind was at rest as to her capacity for entertaining one. She told me more about their affairs than I had hoped. There was no need to be prying, for it evidently drew her out simply to feel that I listened, that I cared. She ceased wondering why I cared, and at last she spoke of the brilliant life they had led years before. She almost chattered. It was Miss Tita who judged it brilliant. She said that when they first came to live in Venice years and years before, I saw that her mind was essentially vague about dates and the order in which events had occurred, there was scarcely a week that they had not some visitor or did not make some delightful passeggio in the city. They had seen all the curiosities; they had even been to the Lido in a boat (she spoke as if I might think there was a way there on foot). They had had a collation there, brought in 3 baskets and spread out on the grass. I asked her what people they had known, and she said, "Oh, very nice ones, the Cavaliere Bombici and the Contessa Altemura, with whom they had had a great friendship. Also English people, the Churtons and the Goldies, and Mrs. Stockstock, whom they had loved dearly; she was dead and gone, poor dear. That was the case with most of their pleasant circle" (this expression was Miss Tita's own), "though a few were left, which was a wonder considering how they had neglected them. She mentioned the names of 2 or 3 Venetian old women, of a certain doctor, very clever, who was so kind he came as a friend, he had really given up practice; of the Avvocato Pochintesta, who wrote beautiful poems and had addressed one to her aunt. These people came to see them without fail every year, usually at the Capodanno, and of old her aunt used to make them some little present, her aunt and she together, small things that she, Miss Tita, made herself, like paper lampshades or mats for the decanters of wine at dinner, or those woolen things that in cold weather were worn on the wrists. The last few years there had not been many presents; she could not think what to make, and her aunt had lost her interest and never suggested. But the people came all the same; if the Venetians liked you once they liked you forever. There was something affecting in the good faith of this sketch of former social glories. The picnic at the Lido had remained vivid through the ages, and poor Miss Tita evidently was of the impression that she had had a brilliant youth. She had in fact had a glimpse of the Venetian world in its gossiping, home-keeping, parsimonious professional walks; for I observed for the first time that she had acquired by contact something of the trick of the familiar, soft-sounding, almost infantile speech of the place. I judged that she had imbibed this invertebrate dialect from the natural way the names of things and people, mostly purely local, rose to her lips. If she knew little of what they represented she knew still less of anything else. Her aunt had drawn in; her failing interest in the table mats and lampshades was a sign of that, and she had not been able to mingle in society or to entertain it alone; so that the matter of her reminiscences struck one as an old world altogether. If she had not been so decent her references would have seemed to carry one back to the queer rococo Venice of Casanova. I found myself falling into the error of thinking of her too as one of Jeffrey Aspern's contemporaries. This came from her having so little in common with my own. It was possible, I said to myself, that she had not even heard of him. It might very well be that Juliana had not cared to lift even for her the veil that covered the temple of her youth. In this case she perhaps would not know of the existence of the papers, and I welcomed that presumption; it made me feel more safe with her, until I remembered that we had believed the letter of disavowal received by Cumnor to be in the handwriting of the niece. If it had been dictated to her she had of course to know what it was about; yet after all the effect of it was to repudiate the idea of any connection with the poet. I held it probable at all events that Miss Tita had not read a word of his poetry. Moreover, if, with her companion, she had always escaped the interviewer, there was little occasion for her having got it into her head that people were "after" the letters. People had not been "after" them, inasmuch as they had not heard of them, and Cumnor's fruitless feeler would have been a solitary accident. When midnight sounded Miss Tita got up, but she stopped at the door of the house only after she had wandered 2 or 3 times with me round the garden. "When shall I see you again?" I asked before she went in; to which she replied with promptness that she should like to come out the next night. She added however that she should not come; she was so far from doing everything she liked. "You might do a few things that I like," I said with a sigh. "Oh, you I don't believe you!" she murmured at this, looking at me with her simple solemnity. "Why don't you believe me?" "Because I don't understand you." "That is just the sort of occasion to have faith." I could not say more, though I should have liked to, as I saw that I only mystified her, for I had no wish to have it on my conscience that I might pass for having made love to her. Nothing less should I have seemed to do had I continued to beg a lady to believe in me in an Italian garden on a midsummer night. There was some merit in my scruples, for Miss Tita lingered and lingered. I perceived that she felt that she should not really soon come down again, and wished therefore to protract the present. She insisted too on making the talk between us personal to ourselves, and altogether her behavior was such as would have been possible only to a completely innocent woman. "I shall like the flowers better now that I know they are meant also for me." "How could you have doubted it? If you will tell me the kind you like best, I will send a double lot of them." "Oh, I like them all best." Then she went on, familiarly, "Shall you study, shall you read and write when you go up to your rooms?" "I don't do that at night, at this season. The lamplight brings in the animals." "You might have known that when you came." "I did know it." "And in winter do you work at night?" "I read a good deal, but I don't often write." She listened as if these details had a rare interest, and suddenly a temptation, quite at variance with the prudence I had been teaching myself, associated itself with her plain, mild face. Ah, yes, she was safe and I could make her safer. It seemed to me from one moment to another that I could not wait longer, that I really must take a sounding. So I went on. "In general, before I go to sleep, very often in bed it's a bad habit, but I confess to it I read some great poet. In 9 cases out of 10 it's a volume of Jeffrey Aspern." I watched her well as I pronounced that name, but I saw nothing wonderful. Why should I indeed? Was not Jeffrey Aspern the property of the human race? "Oh, we read him, we have read him," she quietly replied. "He is my poet of poets. I know him almost by heart." For an instant Miss Tita hesitated; then her sociability was too much for her. "Oh, by heart, that's nothing," she murmured, smiling. "My aunt used to know him. To know him," she paused an instant and I wondered what she was going to say, "to know him as a visitor." "As a visitor?" I repeated, staring. "He used to call on her and take her out." I continued to stare. "My dear lady, he died 100 years ago." "Well," she said mirthfully, "my aunt is 150." "Mercy on us!" I exclaimed. "Why didn't you tell me before? I should like so to ask her about him." "She wouldn't care for that; she wouldn't tell you," Miss Tita replied. "I don't care what she cares for. She must tell me. It's not a chance to be lost." "Oh, you should have come 20 years ago. Then she still talked about him." "And what did she say?" I asked eagerly. "I don't know; that he liked her immensely." "And she didn't she like him?" "She said he was a god." Miss Tita gave me this information flatly, without expression. Her tone might have made it a piece of trivial gossip, but it stirred me deeply as she dropped the words into the summer night. It seemed such a direct testimony. "Fancy, fancy!" I murmured. And then, "Tell me this, please. Has she got a portrait of him? They are distressingly rare." "A portrait? I don't know," said Miss Tita, and now there was discomfiture in her face. "Well, good night," she added, and she turned into the house. I accompanied her into the wide, dusky, stone paved passage which on the ground floor corresponded with our grand sala. It opened at one end into the garden, at the other upon the canal, and was lighted now only by the small lamp that was always left for me to take up as I went to bed. An extinguished candle which Miss Tita apparently had brought down with her stood on the same table with it. "Good night," I replied, keeping beside her as she went to get her light. "Surely you would know, shouldn't you, if she had one?" "If she had what?" the poor lady asked, looking at me queerly over the flame of her candle. "A portrait of the god. I don't know what I wouldn't give to see it." "I don't know what she has got. She keeps her things locked up." And Miss Tita went away toward the staircase with the sense, evidently, that she had said too much. I let her go; I wished not to frighten her, and I contented myself with remarking that Miss Bordereau would not have locked up such a glorious possession as that, a thing a person would be proud of and hang up in a prominent place on the parlor wall. Therefore of course she had not any portrait. Miss Tita made no direct answer to this, and candle in hand, with her back to me, ascended 2 or 3 stairs. Then she stopped short and turned round, looking at me across the dusky space. "Do you write? Do you write?" There was a shake in her voice; she could scarcely bring out what she wanted to ask. "Do I write? Oh, don't speak of my writing on the same day with Aspern's." "Do you write about him? Do you pry into his life?" "Ah, that's your aunt's question; it can't be yours. I said in a tone of slightly wounded sensibility. "All the more reason that you should answer it. Do you, please?" I thought I had allowed for the falsehoods I should have to tell, but I found that in fact when it came to the point I had not. Besides, now that I had an opening there was a kind of relief in being frank. Lastly, it was perhaps fanciful, even fatuous, I guessed that Miss Tita personally would not in the last resort be less my friend. So after a moment's hesitation I answered, "Yes, I have written about him, and I am looking for more material. In heaven's name, have you got any?" "Santo Dio!" she exclaimed, without heeding my question, and she hurried upstairs and out of sight. I might count upon her in the last resort, but for the present she was visibly alarmed. The proof of it was that she began to hide again, so that for a fortnight I never beheld her. I found my patience ebbing, and after 4 or 5 days of this I told the gardener to stop the flowers. End of Chapter 5.